So should I count to 10 after you go live?
Live now, yeah.
Okay, welcome everybody on behalf of Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. I'm pleased to welcome you to our virtual talk with Jerry Weiser, a Holocaust survivor. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm an educator at the museum. For those of you who have not been to the museum before, ours is the first Holocaust survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States, which you can see on my virtual background behind me. In the 1960s, a group of survivors worked together to create a memorial for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust, and this memorial eventually became Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust. These survivors who established our museum did so always with a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. Even though we're not able to be in our museum's physical space for the time being, we are still able to carry on this mission of theirs from home. This morning, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Jerry Weiser, who will share his story with you. And you can type in questions during his talk or after his talk on Zoom or Facebook, however you're watching, and afterwards he'll be able to answer some of them. So please join me in welcoming Jerry Weiser.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everybody. Let me start by introducing myself first. My name now is Jerry Weiser. As I share my story with you, you'll understand why I said that my name now is Jerry Weiser. But in order for you to understand where I'm coming from, I'm going to start with my late mother's story first. I don't see any slide. Oh, okay, next, please. Okay. This is the photo of my mother. She was 19 years old when World War II broke out. As you probably know by now, World War II broke out on September 1st, 1939. The first act of the war was the German and the Russian invaded Poland. Next, please. On the west side of the map of Poland is Germany. On the north side is Russia. They invaded Poland. It took them 5 weeks and 1 day to occupy Poland. My mother was born in the southern part of Poland in a small city by the name of Tarnów. And you can see that the city of Tarnów is right on the border of the state of Slovakia. Now, the German didn't invade Slovakia, and the reason was because they had a fascist government. So in a lot of points, they agreed with the German philosophy, so they didn't have to invade. They just marched into the country, and some people even greeted them with flowers when they marched in. Next, please. And here you can see how they greeted them. All the children in the school were already brainwashed with the Nazi regime ideology. So here, you can see how they greeted them when they marched into the country. About 3 months after the war broke out and after the occupation, my mother came home and she found out that her parents, her younger brother, and her grandmother are all gone. She was looking for them, but she couldn't find them. Finally, one of the neighbors told her, you know, I saw the Nazi troops coming in and picked them up off the street and took them away. After that day, my mother never saw her family again. And here she was left, a 19-year-old girl, and she didn't know how she's going to survive. So she decided for herself, the best thing for her will be if she'll cross the border to Slovakia. So one evening, she packed her belongings and she crossed the border by foot. She didn't want to take a car so she won't be detected. And she ended up in a tiny city right on the border. Next, please. The name of the city was Žilina. You can see it on top with a red circle. It's right on the border of Poland. When she got there, the first thing that she was doing, she was looking for a job so she can survive. And then she realized that one of the things that the Slovaks did, the first thing that they did was they came with a law that a Jewish person can only work for a Jewish person. And since this was such a tiny city, there were very few Jewish people in the city. So she had a very hard time finding a job. But finally, after a couple of weeks, she found an elderly lady that needed help in the house. So my mother was so happy that she found a job and she started working for her. And everything was going fine. But after a few days, the lady told her, you know, there are some neighbors already asking me about you. And since you are not a citizen of Slovakia, it might be dangerous for you to stay here because everybody in this tiny city knows everybody. So I suggest for you, the lady said, why don't you move to a larger city like Bratislava? That's the capital of Slovakia. It's a big city and you can blend in and nobody will know who you are or where you are from. And on top of it, if you take my advice and you move there, you don't have to look for a job because my daughter lives there and she works with her husband in their successful business and they need help at the house. So my mother took her advice and she moved to Bratislava. Now, Bratislava, she found out, was a large city. She didn't have any problems finding the Engel family, her daughter, because the husband was very known in the community. He was a very successful business. He was an expert in coffee, and he was importing coffee from all over the world. And he had a warehouse with over 100 employees, a very successful business. So my mother found them and she started working for them and everything was fine. Several weeks later, she met a young gentleman and a couple of months later, they decided to get married. But it wasn't so simple because he fled Poland too. And on top of it, they were both Jewish. So there is no way they can go to the city hall and obtain a license to get married. So the only choice that they had was to live as husband and wife. On September 6, 1941, I was born. And the name that I was given was Henrich Juraj. This was my first name. When I was about 7 months old, my father, who was an electrician, worked in the city in a factory. And one evening, he didn't come home from work. My mother went to his workplace and she found out that the Gestapo and the SS troops came in, rounded up all the Jewish employees and took them away. After this minute, my mother never saw her husband again. And here she was all by herself with a baby, a 7-month-old. She didn't know how she's going to survive those conditions. Meanwhile, they started building a ghetto in the city. Now, what is a ghetto? They took the small Jewish neighborhood, they built a brick wall around it with barbed wires on top. Basically, they built a ghetto, a prison. This is how bad this was. And now they forced all the Jewish people from the city that they evicted from their apartments to move to this tiny place. And since this was a large city, there were thousands of them. And they started squeezing them into this small place. They told them, leave all your belongings. Later on, you'll come back to your place. The only thing that you have to take with you is your valuables. So you have it with you. So they took the valuables and they were marching into the ghetto. Next, please. And here you can see them walking to the ghetto. Now notice that they're all wearing a Jewish star on their pallet. This was one of the requirements that every Jewish person, when he leaves his house, has to wear it. So everybody on the street will know that he is Jewish. So he can be identified as a Jew. So they moved into this tiny place and it became so crowded. In some places, they put 6 families in one room. This is how bad it was. And the food was scarce in the ghetto. It was very hard to find any food. When I was 7 months old, my mother was forced to go to the ghetto too. The minute she walked in and she saw this condition, she was wondering, how is she going to raise a 7-month-old baby in those conditions? So in her mind already, she had this feeling and thoughts that somehow she has to find a way to smuggle me out of this place. Well, she was lucky. There was a nurse that used to come to the ghetto. She had a permit to go through the gate in and out. She came twice a month for the whole day, just to help the women in the ghetto. She was a volunteer. She didn't do much because there were thousands of women. How much could she help in one day or 2 days a month? But she did whatever she could. And my mother approached her and asked her, will you be willing to smuggle my baby out of the ghetto? Surprisingly, the lady agreed. And by the end of the day, she came to my mother to pick me up. I don't know if you can imagine that, but a mother to give up a baby of 7 months old that she might never see again. But she knew this might be the only chance that I might survive, because there were already rumors that they're going to liquidate the ghetto and send them all to the camps. So my mother agreed with heavy heart. She gave me up to the lady, and the lady smuggled me out through the gate throughout the ghetto. Meanwhile, I want to tell you that the Germans were very smart in propaganda. They even had a minister in their government by the name of Goebbels. His only job was to spread the Nazi regime ideology all over the world. They did many things. One of the things that they did, they printed money, a German 1 mark note. Next, please. And here you can see it. It's 1 mark. And this money was supposed to be used only in the ghetto. Notice that on the left corner, on the top, there is a Jewish star. And on the other side of the note is a Jewish menorah. And this money was supposed to be used only in the ghetto. They wanted to show the world that everything is normal in the ghetto. People have money, they are buying, they are selling, but this was nothing further from the truth, because there was nothing to buy and nothing to sell. The only thing that this money was used to, the German took away the valuables of the people who came to the ghetto and gave them this piece of paper. It was like monopoly money, worthless. But this is, meanwhile, their object was working, because they told the whole world that everything is normal in the ghetto. Meanwhile, they decided to liquidate the ghetto and send them all to the camps. My mother was loaded on a train, on a cattle wagon, and she was taken first to the first city that she crossed the border, to Žilina. Next, please. Because this place had a train depot, and from this place, the train went to all the camps in Germany and Poland. And here, this is a memorial that stands there today. And you can see on the track, it says, Road of No Return. Most of those Jews who left this place never returned alive. They were all murdered in the camps. And this memorial stands there today. I found it when I visited the city of Žilina in 2013. So they loaded them on the train to go to Auschwitz. But the Germans needed the tracks for their own use. They needed to move ammunition, to move supplies for their army. So they really didn't care that the Jews are sitting or lying on the train. It usually takes between 5 and 6 hours from this place to Auschwitz. It took my mother 10 days because she was on the train with no water, no food, hardly any air, only the air that came through the cracks of the wagon. This is how bad it was. The conditions were horrible. There were hundreds of people in one wagon. They could hardly have space to sit down. There was no privacy or anything like that. Some people died on the train even before they arrived to Auschwitz. But after 10 days, horrible days, my mother finally arrived at Auschwitz. Next, please. And here you can see the entrance to the camp. And notice another propaganda act. On top of the gate, it says in German, Arbeit macht frei, work will make you free. They wanted to show the world again that this is only a working camp. People are coming, working, going home, everything is normal. There was nothing further from the truth. 10,000 Jews were killed there every day. This is how bad this place was. It was unbelievable, horrible. Next, please. After a while, since the trains were coming from all over Europe, by the thousands, the Auschwitz camp became overcrowded. So the Germans decided to build another camp about a mile away. It was called Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. I visited this place in 2013 too, and here you can see a photo of the camp. But notice a few things. First of all, you can see that some of the buildings in front are missing. And those buildings were wooden buildings. And the reason that they are missing was because as the Russian army was advancing towards the camp, the Germans decided to demolish the camp so there won't be any evidence that was ever a camp there. Well, they burned down the wooden shacks, but they didn't have enough time to demolish the brick building behind them. So this is why they are standing there. Notice another thing here. You can see there is a fence around the camp. And this was electric fence. So if you touch this fence, you are dead on the spot. You get electrocuted and you die right on the spot. So nobody could escape from this place. Notice another thing is it looks nice and green when I took this photo, but it doesn't do justice to the place because during the war, this whole place was black and gray. Even the snow that was falling down was black. And the reason was, after they took the Jews to the gas chamber, they burned them in the ovens. And the ashes were covering this whole place. And the smell was horrible. And this was going 24 hours a day. So this is how gray and black this place was. Next, please. And this is a very famous photo. You probably saw it in other places. This is the entrance to the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. Notice that there are train tracks going through the gate and unloading the people inside the camp. What's special about this photo is when it was taken. This particular photo was taken on the anniversary of the liberation of this camp. And here you can see there was a ceremony there. There were thousands of people on the ground and they were participating in the ceremony. But I want to tell you how the Jews came to the camp. When they came in, whoever survived the train ride, they unloaded them off the train, the first thing that they did to them, they separated the families. Women and children were on one side. They were taken to the gas chamber right away. And to the left, the men. Now the men were taken, they shaved their head, they tattooed a number on the arm. And from this moment, nobody called you by your name, only by your number that you had on your arm. Then they gave them these striped pajamas outfits. So you can imagine the condition of those people. They separated them from their families. They evicted them from their apartments. They shaved their head. They tattooed a number. They were all hungry. The only thing that they had on their mind was, where is my next meal coming from? And the meal was a piece of bread or a soup that was like water. So when you're hungry, this is all what you can think of. So they were all depressed. This is the condition of the people who came to this camp. So they wanted to show in this ceremony the difference between then and today. So what did they do? They had a flyover, you can see on top, of 3 F-15 jets that flew from Israel over the camp. Because the motto of the Israeli army is, never again. This will never happen to the Jewish people again. By the way, the commander of this flight, his mother was a survivor of this camp. Next, please. This is another photo of the same flyover. But in this photo, you can see the size of the camp. I mean, it's so huge. It's like a city. This is how big it was. I don't think the whole camp is even in the frame, but you can see how big it is. You can get an idea. Next, please. While my mother was in the camp, there was a few professions that the German needed. They needed builders, plumbers, electricians, because they had to maintain the camp. Another thing that was very important for them, to keep the prisoner quiet and relaxed, they formed an orchestra. They took musicians among the prisoners and they made a band. And the band was playing classical music while they were marching the Jews to the gas chamber. Not only that, they also played for the officers. As cruel as the Germans were, they loved classical music. So most of those musicians survived the war, because if you had an important job in the camp, you survived. Another thing that they needed badly was they needed translators. And luckily, my mother spoke 5 languages. She spoke perfect German, Polish, Czech, Slovak, and Yiddish. So they used her as a translator because, you know, Jews came from all over Europe and the German needed to communicate with them. So my mother became a translator. By being a translator, one of the privileges that she had was to write a postcards from the camp. And here you can see a copy of one of the postcards that my mother wrote. She managed to write 4 postcards. There were a few conditions for the postcards. First of all, it has to be written in German, so the German can read what she's writing. Then it was only a postcard. So in these postcards, my mother asked the family, she mailed the postcards to the business of the husband of the Engel family. And she asked him, how is my Henrich Juraj doing? She wanted to know whatever happened to me. But because this was also a propaganda act, they wanted to show the world that there is a post office in the camp and people are sending mail. But the trick was that the mail went only one way, it went out, but the mail never came back to the camp. So they never got an answer. She never got an answer from the Engel family. Next, please. The next condition was to write all her personal information on the card. So here you can see her name. Pomeranz Gisela was the name. 7747 was the number that was tattooed on my mother's arm. And she stayed in building 11, Camp Birkenau. My mother got those postcards after the war from the Engel family. Next, please. While she was in the camp, every morning they used to do a roll call. And here you can see them on the illustration on the left. They standing here in line, thousands and thousands of people every morning. Now this roll call took hours because they had to call the number of each one of them. And some people tried overnight to escape. I mean, nobody could escape from this place, and they caught him. So there was a small stage in front of the roll call line, and they just hanged them in front of everybody else. So happened that my mother had one cousin from her family that stayed with her in the same barrack that my mother was. And she tried to commit suicide a few times by trying to get to the fence and throwing herself on it. But the last minute, the other people caught her and wouldn't let her die. And one morning, when they called them out for the roll call, she was getting late coming out. And everybody screamed at her, "Why don't you run? Come out." She said, "I forgot something on my bunk and I'm coming out in a second." And when she came out, she came without the shoes. And for the German, if you don't have shoes, you're worthless. You're like that person. They don't need you anymore. So during the roll call, the officer who was conducting the roll call walked up to her and shot her in the head and killed her on the spot. And she was only 18 years old. And this is how my mother lost her cousin in the camp. While my mother was in the camp, I mean, even though she was a translator, her physical condition was bad as everybody else. But at least she knew that she's not going to be sent to the gas chamber because they needed her, as she had this important job of being a translator. But she said to herself, "I have to stay sane because those conditions can drive me crazy." So she decided the best thing for her will be, she started to compose poems. So every night when she was lying in her bunk, all night long, she composed poems. She managed to compose 11 poems. This is the first one. It was called the Appel, the roll call poem. This was just the beginning when she arrived to the camp. So she was new to the camp and she was still hoping that she's going to be released from this madhouse and resume her normal life. She didn't know that she's going to be in the camps over 3 years. So here, I'm not going to read you the poem. By the way, the poem, all the poem were written and composed in German, so it rhymes. And here you can see it was translated to English, so it doesn't rhyme anymore, but it's an accurate translation. And here you can see the last line. It says, "We will build a better world." She was still hoping that she's going to be released and resume her normal life. Next, please. This is the booth that the officer who was conducting the roll call was sitting in. So you can see, so he didn't really care that the weather outside, the freezing cold weather and the icy ground that the people were standing on, he was protected from the weather elements. So he didn't really care how long it takes. He was fine. Next, please. Here, towards the end of the war, the Germans started moving all the prisoners from all the camps towards Germany. And my mother was taken to the camp of Ravensbrück. This was basically a women's camp, and the guards were women too, and they were more cruel than the men guards in Auschwitz. They were terrible. And this place was horrible. Now, how did she get here? Auschwitz-Birkenau is in Poland and Ravensbrück camp is in Germany. Well, one morning, every prisoner, instead of getting a small piece of bread or a cup of soup, got a whole loaf of bread. And they were wondering what happened to the German that they became so generous and giving every prisoner a whole loaf of bread. It didn't take them long and they found out because they started marching them from Auschwitz-Birkenau to Ravensbrück, Germany. It took them 3 weeks. They were marching day and night, not only from Auschwitz, from all over the camps in Poland. They marched them to Germany. It was freezing cold. It was February, freezing cold weather. Only 1/3 of the people who started this march made it alive to this camp. 2/3 of the people perished on the way. Some of them from hunger, some of them from disease, and some of them were just shot by the German if they sat down to rest. So this is how bad it was. And when my mother got there, I mean, her condition was terrible. She was skin and bones. She was depressed. She didn't have anything to eat. She was so hungry. And she wrote this poem called Ravensbrück. And here you can see the last paragraph of the poem. It says, "The souls are too weak to believe and doubt the power of God, who witnessed this and offer no help." In this, mother completely lost her faith in God and humanity. She thought that she's going to die here in this miserable place. But luckily, on October 15, 1945, my mother was liberated by the Russian army. And since her condition was so bad, they took her and some other women who were the same condition as her by the Red Cross. She was sent to Sweden to go through a rehab in Sweden. When my mother arrived in Sweden, the first thing that she did while she was going through the rehab, she wrote a letter to the Engel family in Bratislava and asked them about me. Well, and she asked them to go and find me. Now I want to mention what happened to me while I was taken out of the ghetto. What did this nurse did to me? Where did she place me? So what she did, she placed me in the city church. Now the church couldn't keep me for long because they were hiding other Jewish children, and the authorities used to come and inspect all the public places in the city, including the churches. So it was dangerous for them to keep me and some other kids. So they decided to distribute those kids to the church members. And I was sent to a farmer outside of the city. And this gentleman was very brave. First of all, he was a God-fearing gentleman and very brave, like I said, because he kept me for 3.5 years till the end of the war. Not only from the authorities that used to come and inspect all the homes in the village to see if anybody is hiding anybody, also from their good neighbors, because if the neighbors will find out that he's hiding a Jewish child, they'll tell the authorities and they'll get a reward. So you can see how brave this gentleman was, and he saved my life. While I was there, the Engel family, when the war ended, my mother asked them to go and find me. Well, they went to the church, and from the church they was sent to the farmer. They took me and they picked me up and brought me back to Bratislava. Now, when they got me there, they told my mother that I am back in Bratislava. So my mother tried to get me to Sweden. But because she was a temporary resident there, the Swedish government wouldn't allow her to bring me over to Sweden. And the Engel family was afraid to keep me because the neighbor already started asking them, who is this child? Where is he from? And so forth. So they decided to give me, to take foster parents for me from the neighbors. The neighbors were the Prisigan family that my mother knew very well while she was working for the Engel family. It was a Christian family just next door to the Engel family. And they asked him, are you willing to take this child to your house for a while? And they agreed, and they took me in. And they liked me from the first moment they saw me. They had one daughter. She was about 10 years older than me. Her name was Magda, and she really got liking to me. And she called me my little brother. This is how much she liked me. Next, please. While my mother was going through the rehab in Sweden, she was starting to perform in the Jewish theater there, and she became very famous. And here you can see a clip from a Swedish newspaper with her photo. She wasn't an actress, so she didn't play in a theater. What she did, she started reciting her poems, and they called them the poetess of Auschwitz. This is how famous she was. Now, she couldn't come back to Slovakia or to Poland because now it was under the communist regime. So if you come in, you can't leave. So the only choice she had one cousin who survived the war from the whole family, and he lived in Israel. He came to Israel after the war, and he asked my mother to come over and be reunited with him. So my mother took his advice, and she boarded a ship in Sweden, and she sailed to Israel. And this was in 1947. But in that time, Israel was under the British mandate, and they wouldn't allow any Jewish immigrant to come to Israel. So just before the ship arrived to the shores of Israel, the British Navy turned around the ship and sailed them to the island of Cyprus. Cyprus is an island just across from Israel, and it was under the British mandate too. So after 3 years being in the German camps, my mother ended up behind barbed wires again. Next, please. And here you can see her in Cyprus. So here she was behind those barbed wires, a prisoner again for a whole year till May 1948, when Israel was declared independence. This is when she was allowed to immigrate to Israel. Meanwhile, I want to show you my first photo that I got from the Prisigan family. Next, please. When I arrived in their home. And here I was 4.5 years old. You can see, this is the only photo that I have in this period. I don't have any baby photos or anything like that. This is the only photo that I got from the Prisigan family. Next, please. And here you can see some photos that I have in my album. On the left, you can see Mr. and Mrs. Prisigan. On the right, you can see me in the living room with the daughter Magda. And you can see how close I was to her. And they really took really good care of me. Next, please. And you can see that I had a lot of fun there. This is a photo that was taken in their home in the backyard. And here I'm here with the dog, Lord, that I love dogs. Still today, I love dogs. And here you can see how happy I was. Next, please. While I lived with the family, I celebrated Christmas with them. And here you can see me with the Christmas tree, with the whole family. And notice that I'm wearing a sailor outfit. After the war in Europe, it was very popular for the kids to wear military outfit. And I got this Navy outfit that my mother sent me before she left Sweden to sail to Israel. And the minute I put this outfit, I liked it so much that in my mind, I decided when I grow up, I'm going to be a sailor. This is how much I like this outfit. Next, please. And here on the left, you can see me with Mrs. Prisigan walking to the church. Every Sunday, Mrs. Prisigan took me to church. Not only she took me to church, she even baptized me there, and I have the certificate to prove it. On the right, you can see me at Christmas again I was reading a book. I guess Mrs. Prisigan wanted to show up all her neighbors that I know how to read because I was already enrolled in school. So I guess this is why they took this particular photo. Next, please. Here you can see some photos that I took in Bratislava while I was visiting there in 2009. On the left, you can see the church that I was going every Sunday, and I was hidden there after I was taken out of the ghetto. And on the right is the Prisigan family. The house still stands there today. Didn't change much. The daughter lives there since the parents already passed away. The only difference I see here with the years, they put a TV dish on the house and a solar heater on the roof. Those things they didn't have in 1945. They didn't even have TV in those days. But the house looks pretty much the same as I left it. Next, please. After my mother arrived in Israel, the first thing that she did, she contacted the Jewish agency and she asked them, please, I want to be reunited with my son and he's in Bratislava. Please bring him to me. Well, the Jewish agency contacted this gentleman, Rabbi Dr. Solomon Schoenfeld, a very famous rabbi in London. During the war, he was a chaplain in the British Army, and he was running at the time a Jewish school in London. And his life calling was to save children. He saved over 3,000 children before the war, during the war, and after the war. This was his life calling. And he was sent to Bratislava by the Jewish agency to find all the orphan and misplaced Jewish children and take them out of the country. Well, when he arrived, he was wearing this uniform, even though it was 3 years after the war. And the reason was, he knew that the communist regime, has a lot of respect for military uniform. So he decided to put this uniform on because he'll have an easier time to find the children that he was looking for and to get through the bureaucracy, because there was a lot of bureaucracy to take the children out. Well, one evening, it was a very sad evening. He came to the Prisigan family, not him personally, he sent some people that was working with him on his team. 2 men came to pick me up. I mean, the Prisigan family didn't want to give me up, and I didn't want to go. And I remember I was crying because I was sure that those are my parents. Why should I leave? But in the end, I didn't have a choice. And the Prisigan family packed for me a small suitcase with my few belongings that I had and my stuffed animal that I had. And they told me, when they gave me the suitcase, make sure that you don't lose this suitcase because this is all what you have. So I was so worried to lose it that I remember that when we took me away from this house and they put me on the train, I didn't sleep all night because I was so worried that I'm going to lose the suitcase. So I put it on my lap and I was holding to it tight all night long. So this is my memories from this train ride. Now, when we took all the kids out, I was united with some other kids that he already started to collect. Next, please. And here you can see some of the kids, and you can see that I'm in the blue circle right in the middle. In all the photos, I'm always in the middle, maybe because I was one of the youngest kids in the group. And first they took us to a Jewish orphanage, Ohel David in Bratislava. And he was still collecting kids. Then he collected more kids. Next, please. And here you can see another group. And here I'm in the middle again. Altogether, he collected 148 children. Now he has to take us out of the country. So he needed a collective visa. One thing that I forgot to mention is when I arrived at the Prisigan family from the Engel family, the first thing that they did, they gave me a Slovak name and they called me Jurek. So all the 3.5 years that I was there, they called me Jurek. This was my name. Next, please. Here is one page of the collective visa. There were 148 names, and you can see the highlight is, it says Prisigan Georgi. And the reason was because one of the conditions of the Slovak government was that children over 15 can't leave, and Slovak kids can't leave either. And me, with the name of Jurek, a Slovak name, I couldn't leave. So the rabbi changed my name to Georgi Prisigan, kind of a Romanian name, Russian name, Georgi. He left me the last name of the Prisigan family. So now my new name was Georgi Prisigan. Now, he had in his group some kids who were 16 and 17 years old. So he manipulated the birth certificate to show that they're only 15. And with those things, we could leave. And we left on a very long journey. Next, please. We left Bratislava, 148 kids, the rabbi and all his volunteers with us. And we crossed Europe. We started from Bratislava, we went through Germany, Netherlands, Belgium. He was looking for a place, a temporary resident that we could stay until he'll find home for us. None of the countries was willing to take us in. So finally, he didn't have a choice and he took us to London. We arrived in London. Now he was looking for a house for us here. He found 48 homes, Jewish homes, that were willing to take one child each. But he was left with 100 kids, nowhere to house them. So he didn't have a choice, and he contacted a good friend of his, Mr. Levy, a pharmacist in London. He was very well-to-do gentleman. He inherited a lot of wineries. He was very wealthy, and he gave a lot of his money and a lot of his time to a lot of Jewish causes. And he begged him, please, Mr. Levy, find me a home for 100 kids. I have to house them. This gentleman was looking all over England to purchase a house for us, but he couldn't find anything. Not that they couldn't find the building itself. This wasn't such a big problem. The problem was, even though it was 3 years after the war, there was still a shortage of food in Europe. So the government of England purchased, every family got a booklet of coupons, and you can purchase food only with the coupons that you had in your booklet. So the government wouldn't issue him 100 booklets for the kids. So we couldn't stay because we couldn't purchase any food. So finally he called the rabbi one morning and he told him, Rabbi, I have good news and bad news for you. The good news is I just purchased a building for you. You can house all the kids, all the 100 kids and all your volunteers in one building. It's large and it's comfortable. The bad news is it's in Ireland and you have to sail to Ireland. So they put us on a boat and we sailed from London to Ireland. And this is the house that we found out that he purchased for us. Next, please. Here it is. This is a castle. And it was gorgeous. I mean, this castle was built in 1639. It was old, very old. But inside, it was so spacious and so elegant and so fancy. I mean, Queen Elizabeth wouldn't be ashamed to live in this place. This is how fancy this place was. On the ground floor, there were big halls, I guess for wedding or ceremonies or meetings, I don't know for what. So the rabbi converted them to classrooms while we were there so we can study, because he didn't know how long we're going to stay there. One of the conditions of the Irish government was that all the children have to leave the country in 12 months. So this put a lot of pressure on the rabbi to find homes to some of the kids, and it wasn't easy. While we was there, we were studying, and between the studies, we played outside. You can see it was a large front yard. We played soccer, basketball, hide and seek. Some of the kids, especially the elderly kids, had a very hard time playing hide and seek because it reminded them that during the war they were hidden, and they realized that this is only a game. But after a while, they realized it's only a game and they can play it, so they got used to it. One thing that I want to notice is when I got there, you have to understand this rabbi and his volunteer, this organization was an Orthodox Jewish organization. So I can't be there with the Georgi Prisigan name. They have to give me a Jewish name. So they changed my name again and they called me Avraham Dov. So I was there, while I was there, they called me Avraham Dov. After 9 months of being there, the rabbi sent me and some other kids to Israel. First they took me to Marseille, France, and from there we boarded a ship and we sailed to Israel. It was a long trip, it was winter, we all got sick on the boat, but after a while, finally, we got to Israel. When we got there, they took us to a holding place, and I was with some other kids there, and they fed us. The next evening, while I was there, a tall gentleman came. I remember him. He was with military outfit, and he had a big mustache. And he picked me up, and he said, "I'm your father, and I'm going to take you to your mother now." So it was evening, I slept the whole way, and he took me all the way to Tel Aviv. When I came to Tel Aviv, I met my mother for the first time. I want to notice one thing. When we traveled in Europe with the rabbi and the kids, they never told us where is our next stop, where are we going? It was always a mystery. So when I got to Israel and I met my mother for the first time, I wasn't sure that this is my last stop after what I went through. It took me a while to realize that this is really my mother and I'm going to stay here. But it took me really a long time to get used to the idea. When I got there, my mother, first thing that she did, she enrolled me in school. Next, please. And I had to start. Oh, before I left, I want to show you this lady on the left. Her name is Lily. She was a lady that took care of me while I was in the castle. And she looked old to me then. Later on, many years later, I found out that she was only 16 years old. And she was one of the hidden children too. But they gave her a job to take care of me while I was in the castle. Next, please. When I arrived in Israel, my mother enrolled me in school. And I added up, you can see me on the left corner, top corner. I was the smallest kid in the class because it took me so much to gain my weight after the undernourishment in Europe. And I was the oldest kid in class. I was 8 years old when I started first grade. And the reason was because they taught me in Ireland to pray in Hebrew, but not to speak in Hebrew. So I didn't know, I wasn't fluent in Hebrew. So I had to start first grade all over again. You remember that I showed you the photo at Christmas with the Prisigan family in Bratislava. And I was wearing this outfit, the sailor outfit. And I told you how much I was dreaming of becoming a sailor. So guess what? When I grew up, next please, I became a sailor, an officer in the Israeli Merchant Marine. So you can see my dream came through. Here I'm smoking, but this was a bad habit that I had then. I don't smoke any longer. Next, please. This is some other photos that I have in my album. On the left, you can see my mother with her cousin that she married in Israel, but because they were blood related, they never had children of their own. And My mother's cousin, who became her husband, adopted me as his son, and he was a wonderful father to me. On the right, you can see my mother. She came to Los Angeles to celebrate with us my son's bar mitzvah. So it was a very happy occasion. Next, please. And here are some other photos that I have. On the left, you can see Magda, the daughter of the president. She sent me this photo in 1949 when I just arrived in Israel. And she wrote on the back of the photo, "So you'll always remember me." So 65 years later, I met her in Bratislava, and you can see her here in the middle of the photo. She changed a little bit over the years. I did too. On the right, you can see when I got married in 1970, the president family wanted to send us a meaningful gift for our wedding. The only thing they could afford and decided this will be very meaningful was they send us their wedding bands, their own wedding bands. And when we visited Bratislava, my wife decided to give those bands back to their daughter, to Magda, because she didn't even know that we got it. And this was a nice souvenir from her parents. Well, she didn't want to take it, so we compromised. We gave her one, and we got one. Next, please. Here is another photo. This is on the steps of the castle. And you can see me right in the middle, in the front. And this photo became very famous because in 2013, I was invited to come to Ireland. A lady from London by the name of Barbara Barnett, a very famous lady in London, she decided to write a book about the castle, the rabbi, and the children. And it was a ceremony in Dublin for the publishing of the book. Barbara Barnett is 94 years old today, a very bright lady, very sharp, even in her age. Next, please. And I came to Dublin and I met her for the first time. You can see on the right, me with Barbara Barnett. On the left, you can see the cover of the book. It was titled, "The Hide and Seek Children," on the game that we played in the castle. And it took her 15 years of research the book because she wanted to put all the 148 children's stories in the book. Unfortunately, she only found 40 kids. And she put their story in the book, and among them is my story too. And here you can see a copy of the book that I'm holding today. Unfortunately, you cannot purchase the book today because surprisingly, the book was sold out. So I understand that this summer, the second edition is coming out, and you can purchase it then on Amazon.com. When we were there, I met some of the other kids, there were kids at the time, with me in Ireland. Next, please. And here you can see them. We're standing in the front of the castle. We drove all the way to the castle. It's about an hour away from Dublin. You can see in this photo that the castle is not kept as good as it was when we were there. When we were there, it was perfect. And here you can see some of my friends that we were kids at the time when we stayed in the castle. And Barbara Barnett is right in the middle here on this photo. Now you have to understand what was the purpose of the Nazi regime and Hitler on top. They wanted to eliminate the Jewish people of this earth. This was the old subject. But my revenge is this, the family that I have today in Los Angeles. Next, please. I have two sons, and this is my second generation. You see my two sons, my daughter-in-law, and my wife and 3 grandkids. I'm often being asked in the museum when I speak, why am I standing here and speaking to all the kids? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, there are a lot of Holocaust deniers today. Some professors in universities, some politicians, they deny that the Holocaust ever happened. So after you heard my story and what I went through and what my mother went through, you can see that I'm a witness that it happened. It was true, and I'm telling you the story. And now that you heard my story, you become a witness too. So this is why it's so important for you to hear the story. Another thing is very important is not to stand by. If you see something, say something. This is how important it is. Basically, this is my story for today. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions.
Jerry, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. We have a few questions. The first question is, what was the leadership in the castle in Ireland like?
Well, there were a lot of volunteers that worked for the rabbi, but the rabbi was the leader. He was running the whole show.
You showed in your presentation a photo of your mother interned in Cyprus. How did she, do you know how she got that photograph?
Well, the condition at the Cyprus were not so bad as in the German camps. So they had cameras there and they took a lot of pictures. I have some other pictures too, but this is one of them that they took. They were allowed to take pictures.
Have you ever considered writing a book?
No, I didn't write a book, but my wife is writing a children's book with my story. And during this Corona period, I had so much time on hand. So I put all my mother's poem in a book. And I printed it and I have a copy at home. So I understand that one of the museums that I speak in wants to publish this book now.
It's great. Well, I look forward to reading those someday.
Yeah.
And let's see. We have another question. When did your mother share these details with you?
That's a very interesting question. My mother never shared with me any stories about the Holocaust, what she went through. She never spoke about the Holocaust. Even the number that she had on her arm, she removed by plastic surgery. She didn't want to have anything to do with the Holocaust. I have some memories, like I remember that we went to a movie or the theater. We always had to be the last one to leave because my mother couldn't handle crowds around her. This is what I remember. I remember when we went to throw out trash and she saw bread in the trash. She always picked up the bread and she put it on the side because it always reminded her the time that she was hungry in the camps. But she never told me about it. It took me 3 years, me and my wife, to research it. And whatever I told you, I found out in documents. Because whenever my wife asked my mother about information about the Holocaust, my mother always had one answer for her. I am trying to bury it and you trying to dig it out. When I'll pass, why don't you go to my closet and you'll find all kinds of documents and this will answer your questions. Well, after my mother passed away, my wife went to the closet and she found a lot of documents. Among them, she found the postcards that I showed you that the Engel family gave to my mother after the war. And she found a document, since my mother requested reparation from the Germans. They asked her to give her story, what she went through in the camps, because they wanted to compare it with their documents. Because you know, the Germans were very good in keeping documents. So my mother wrote all what she went through to the Germans, and they compared it and they found out that it was true. And from this document, I found everything that my mother went through. Now, as far as the poems, I knew only 2 poems. My mother, 60 years later after the war, she was still reciting them to me by heart. But I didn't know that there were 11 poems. And one day I got some information that there is a book at the Yad Vashem in Jerusalem with Eva Pomeranz Gisela poems. So we went on the website and we found a booklet that they have with 9 poems. So we copied it, but I knew that there were more than 9 poems. So one day, a lady here from an institution in Los Angeles, it's called Bet Tzedek, a lady found out a rare bookstore in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, that he had my mother's poems, a booklet. So we contacted the gentleman, the owner of the store, and he acknowledged that he has this booklet. My first question was, how many copies do you have? He said, no, I have only 1 copy that I purchased in Berlin in an auction many years ago. So I asked him that I want to purchase it, and I purchased the booklet. His first question was, how are you related to the author of the poems? I said, this was my mother. So I purchased the booklet and he sent it to me. So now I have it in my possession. And there are 11 poems there, all the poems that my mother wrote and composed. Now I wanted to know if it's really the original. So when I opened the booklet, inside there was a card that my mother gave this book to somebody that I don't know who it was. And it says, I kept my promise. And she signed it. And this is my mother handwriting. I recognize my mother handwriting very well. So I knew that this is the original booklet. So now I have all the 11 poems. And my wife, that she speaks fluently in German, she translated all the 11 poems. And I have it in the book that I just made together, put all the poems together.
Thank you, Jerry. As I said, I look very forward to reading the full collection one of these days.
I'll be more than happy to bring it to the museum.
Thank you. Can you talk about your stepfather, and when did you learn that he was not your biological father?
Well, my father was a partisan in Europe during the war. And in 1945, he ended up in Romania after the war. And from Romania, he came to Israel. At the time, it was Palestine. I even have a copy of his British passport in Israel that was issued in Israel, and it says Palestine. So I have this passport. And what was the question?
When did you find out that your stepfather was not your biological father?
I never knew it after my mother passed away, and we sat Shiva in our house in Tel Aviv. And my cousin was visiting, and he tells my cousin in front of me sitting there, you know, Yoram is not my son. So this is the first time that I found out. I mean, he was a wonderful father to me all his life, but at that time already, my father suffered from dementia and he wasn't really with it. But this is when it came out, and this is the first time that I found out that he was not my biological father.
And did you ever find out anything about your biological father?
No, we did a lot of research. I even did a DNA test, and no, we couldn't find anything about him. No, unfortunately not.
And it looks like those are all the questions. Just as a reminder to our audience, if you have any last questions, you can feel free to type them in. In the meantime, Jerry, I wanted to ask you how you decided to keep the name Jerry Weiser.
This was funny. When I got to the United States, I don't know, for some reason, nobody could pronounce my name Yoram that my mother gave me when I came to Israel. It's a simple name, but nobody couldn't pronounce it. They called me Yorman, all kinds of ways. So I got, and everywhere I went, the first thing they asked me, can you please spell my name? So I got so tired of it and I changed it to Jerry. I didn't have to change my last name Weiser because it's very similar to Budweiser. So everybody knows how to spell it and how to pronounce it. And from this day, I call myself Jerry.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry, again for sharing your story.
My pleasure.
We just had one last question. When and why did you come to the United States? And where does your family live in the United States?
Well, my family lives in Los Angeles. Luckily, they're all 5 minutes away from us. My both sons live very close to us. And the reason I came to the United States, in 1973, I participated in the Yom Kippur War in Israel. I was mobilized for 6 months. I was one of the units that built the bridges over the Suez Canal. And I lost 13 of my good friends for my unit. It was a brutal war. And like every other soldiers, I had a lot of memories from the war and I had to clean my head. And I decided I'm going to come to the United States just for a visit and clear my head. Well, when I came here, some opportunities came up. And since 1975, I stayed here. And then my family grew.
And your parents stayed in Israel for the
Yeah, my
rest of
parents
their
stayed in
lives,
Israel
right?
and they passed away. My mother passed away about 13 years ago, and my father about 7 months later.
And it's the last ones. What was your profession in the United States, and how many total names did you have?
I had 6 names altogether. And my profession, I started here by building coffee shop in high-rise office building. This is how I started in construction. And I was running the coffee shops for a while and selling them each time, new location. And then I became a general contractor. I became to building homes and I was in real estate. I developed some homes. This was my profession here. And now I'm retired.
Well, Jerry, thank you so much again for sharing your story. Before we were working from home, Jerry would speak at our museum regularly to school groups and all different groups of audience. And so we just thank you so much for constantly sharing this very important story with our community. We have several comments on our page just thanking you and saying that people were just very grateful for having the opportunity to hear your story. I would like to just remind everybody watching that while the museum is closed to the public, we will regularly have these virtual programs. We have Survivor Talks on Tuesdays at 11. For more information about our upcoming programs, visit our website, www.lamoth.org. And for those watching on our Facebook page, you can subscribe to that page to get more information about our upcoming programs. And of course, we invite everybody to join us at the museum when it's safe and when we are reopened. And you can see the background behind me. This is the museum located in Pan Pacific Park, right across from the Grove in Los Angeles. Admission is always free. Thank you very much again, Jerry, and hope to see everybody again soon.
Thank you.